I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris and Vertex, for their support. I was so excited I started before the recording even happened. So I'm very excited. And I love that I was able to bump into Aaron Trumm via an email. You reached out to check out about a scholarship program that we have for college. And we unfortunately only award to undergrads, but I was intrigued to learn about you because I think you're really interesting and wonderful and smart. And you do have CF, you're post-transplant. You started a recording label, you play the piano, you rap, and you worked with a man known as the Lion of Zimbabwe, which we will talk about. And you're also going to law school in the fall. So we have a lot to talk about. So Aaron, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. I'm excited to hear about all the things that you're doing. How old are you now? And tell us briefly about your CF story and, take us through the post-transplant.
I'm 49 now. I'll be 50 in June.
Wonderful.
The CF journey story. I remember you asked me that about that on email, and I said, I don't know how to tell that story. Actually, I guess I can say some things just off the bat. I guess my journey or my experience with CF is not typical, at least according to what I've heard, especially for when I was first coming up and when I was a kid. As you might know, 1980 or thereabouts, when I was diagnosed, life expectancy was something like 20. And there was a lot of things that were not recommended that are now standard practice, like exercise and vitamins, for example. Those are two big ones. And so a lot of people my age that I've met or I've heard of had this experience of CF as, being in and out of hospitals all the time and being super used to being in hospitals, and almost what I would call an institutionalized sort of attitude about that they expected to be in the hospital. And they even, in some cases, I feel like they were kind of attached to it and wanted it. I did not spend any time in hospitals at all, except for getting my appendix out when I was 7, which is kind of how they diagnosed me. And that was probably mostly due to exercise and stuff like that. My parents were just really insistent that I exercise. And so I started martial arts when I was 5. And I was lucky enough to have teachers who would not coddle me. So it was like, we'd be running laps and I'd be, oh, you're trying to kill me. No, you got to run. And from then on out, and I played soccer since I was 5 too. And I got interested in football when I was probably 2. And it was just a function of, we had just moved into a house. We were actually building. My dad ran a construction company. So he built our house when I was a baby.
Is this in New Mexico when you were?
Yeah, this was in Taos, New Mexico. They had moved there from Austin. Both of my parents went to the University of Texas. Big old hippies, moved to Taos, lived in a tent, that kind of thing, and had a baby. And they decided that it wasn't going to work to, live in a tent or a cold house. So my dad built a house. When we were sort of building the house, the story my mom tells is that we just didn't have anything to do on weekends except be tired and watch TV. And it was the fall, 1976. The only thing you could ever watch on TV in the weekends in 1976 with 3 channels was football. So I think I got the impression that it was the most important thing in the world. And so I was interested in football. I was pretty much decided I was going to play in the NFL from the time I was like 2, which obviously I didn't. But I think that helped me because my whole mentality was that of an athlete. So, in addition to martial arts and soccer, for a long time in grade school, every morning I would spend, my mom would, or my dad, one of them would throw me footballs and make me sprint. And I can't, there's no better airway clearance thing than running, basically. I mean, you've got vibrations, you've got exercise. Nothing they tried on me could even come close. We had these rubber mallets that they wanted to bang me with. And there wasn't really any other treatment either. I didn't have inhalers until later. So I think that's a large function of why I didn't spend a lot of time in hospitals, because at the time, exercise was kind of counterintuitive or counter. It was not recommended. They didn't say you couldn't exercise necessarily, but they were like, well, I don't think this is going to help you. And they were kind of like poo-pooing my mom's thing about exercise, but she just didn't listen.
Well, that's good. And I was just going to say, my girls are 27 and 30. Exercise was definitely not like, go exercise. It was more like, do your vests. And at the time, those vests were plugged into a wall. And then I met someone with CF who he worked out all the time. And he said, I don't care what the doctors say, get your girls to become active. And that's what I did. And that was, now doctors say it, but you're a million times correct.
I guess there had to be some pioneers. And that's the way science a lot of times works. I almost wonder if it's unfortunate. But, you have to have some pioneers that just aren't even willing to listen to the data, just go with their gut. And I credit my mom with that. She just sort of knew. And you could see if you ran me around, I would cough up a bunch of stuff. If you hit me in the back, I might cough some. It just didn't work the same, right? And at the time, there was no other than, some enzymes. And I've been taking enzymes since I was 8, right? Because that's the other big problem with CF is you got your lungs and you got your pancreas, right? So kids don't grow. And there was nothing else. I mean, there's just like, I didn't have any other treatments. So, the prognosis wasn't good. I obviously was like, no, that's not going to work for me. And so, my journey is kind of one where I didn't have a lot of hospital visits. That's great. But I also had sort of a long history of being really, really non-compliant. Like, really, for a long time, my view of anyone in a white coat was they're evil. They're the ones trying to kill me. Obviously, when you're 8 and someone, in a white coat says, well, you're going to die. Obviously, didn't say that to me, but somehow I got the message. You don't sort of separate them from the message, or separate the message from, the cause that you think, well, that's the person that wants me to not be okay, right? So I was really angry, really, really like not going to comply. And also to boot, just super scared, super scared of needles. So it was like, and I've often told clinic people now, I kind of do this advocacy thing sometimes when I'm talking to clinic people. I try to explain it to them. It's way better now, but I try to explain it to them like, one of the things is like when I was a kid, we would drive 3 hours from Taos to Albuquerque, 5:30 in the morning every 6 months, get to a clinic at 9 a.m., be in a white room, and just wait. And I didn't really understand when it was that I was going to have the dreaded blood test. And so I was waiting there sort of like in this feeling of basically an existential threat. You're just like in a room waiting to see if someone's going to hurt you. And there was very little communication. People just make you wait for hours and then come in, fly in. It's kind of still what doctors do, but the CF clinics are a little better, I think. So I had this sort of mentality like, screw you guys, I'm out. And when I was 18, I just said, I'm done. I'm not going back to that. And, I traveled all the world. I moved places. I would find doctors, primary care physicians, and I would kind of just browbeat them into writing my prescription for my enzymes and maybe a whatever albuterol inhaler, which I would sometimes use, and I would say, "Yeah, that's you wrote that. Thanks, goodbye," and just not. I didn't have a blood test or anything for 13 years, and that was all fine until the point at which I was 38. It all tanked. Right, I just couldn't do that anymore. I was just gonna die basically, and so it was a weird sort of thing where I don't have the same experience of having like a long history. Oh, I love the clinic people. I have all these friends. I know people now who like grew up and they have all these really dear friends that have CF and all this stuff. I didn't do that. I was just like, no, I'm out. Post-trans, in the transplant thing, I just had to change my entire mentality from non-compliance to strict compliance, which was a matter of survival. So when people ask me if they ask me for advice, about life in general, I end up telling them you got to be able to change when it's time, right? So you can survive. So the transplant story is actually pretty weird and cool because I was really tanked. I was not involved in the clinics and I just tanked and I had like 13% lung function. And I came back and there was no choice but to go back to the clinic and see what could be done. And I remember making this kind of walk of shame because I felt like it was a failure to go back to the clinic. And they helped me out. Lucky for me, most medical professionals don't hold a grudge over that kind of thing. So there was a couple key people that just said, look, you're very sick. We have to help you. And then a bunch of people in my life, including my girlfriend and my stepmother. And my stepmother is a medical professional. She's a midwife and a nurse. They all kind of said, hey, look, we know that you're into Eastern medicine. We know that you've done a lot, but we know you have a lot of power to heal yourself, but maybe you don't have the power to get past this. And here's the thing, you're either going to die or you're going to do something different. And even then, I don't think that was enough. I think that there was this moment where I had this positive motivation as well. Like when I realized once I got transplanted lungs and healed up from that, how much easier things would be. Because by then I'd, spent 30 years as an athlete and a martial artist. I had played ice hockey in college. I still play ice hockey. Like it's almost, if you gave me $1 billion and said you don't have to do anything, I would just play ice hockey and I would train still. So it was like, oh my God, it's going to be so much easier. So I had this sort of double motivation. And from then on out, it was a whole thing of changing my mentality, doing all this work. I really wasn't healthy enough to even get a transplant. They cut my hair. They told me what to say. It was almost like being a politician. I ended up with this just team around me. And people were raising funds. I think we raised something like $20,000, which, as you might not be surprised to hear, went fast. Once we had to travel for transplant and all this stuff, we blew through that. But it was a whole big thing where I just sort of saw, I became something very different, and I saw sort of a kind of being that was very outside of the conversation of transplant, CF, anything like that. But it was more like, hey, what am I, a politician? Am I some kind of leader? It changed my whole view of what being a musician is, what being any kind of even small level public figure is. Like, I even have a blog post now that I send to people it says I'm not about music, even though that's sent to my music fans, but because it's not really music, that it's really about sort of this leadership or a conversation or connection that you make, and you use whatever it is. If you're a musician, you use music. If you're artist, you use art, but you're making this connection first and foremost. And, I see my role as like a musician as kind of a leader. I hate to say that because I think it's arrogant sounding, but it's almost that. It's just an advocate for inspiration or whatever, right? Which is why I kind of ended up slowly going toward this idea of law school, even though I didn't really think that would ever be a thing, because I realized, over the last 10, 11 years since the transplant, there's been all these moments of, hey, you're more than you knew. You're more than you thought you were going to be alive. What are you going to do next, right?
And I think one of the things that is so refreshing about you is that you have this different thought. Like, you don't feel like you have to follow every rule that's ever been out there about CF. I like that you think about yourself and what works for you. And I think that's refreshing. I think a lot of people will appreciate that. And probably a lot of people will be able to relate, like, oh my gosh, I felt that way too, but I didn't say anything. Or, I said something, but the reaction wasn't great. But when you talk about being in charge of it, or the boss of it, the leader of it, that's exactly what you have to do. It is your business to be healthy and be the overseer of everything. Because, like, before we started this podcast, you were talking about you had to oversee some things really quickly. And when my daughters took over their insurance, they learned that right away. Yeah, I was on the phone for 7 hours talking to the insurance company. Like, how do you do that? So.
God. Yes. Yeah. That's you. I say in my personal statement for the law school application, I said that exact thing. I was like, you don't understand. Like, I'm healthy. I can do things, but it's this job you have to do. And people think that the primary care physician should be the center of, in theory, the system is designed so that the primary care physician does that, but they don't. It's just impossible. So the only person that can be the center of that is you as the patient. And so, I don't get a whole lot of chance to talk to young patients, but if I did, I would tell them, look, you got to balance the idea of, hey, don't be the weakling that they want you to be, but also you are the one that has to do this work. And you have to be at the center of it. So if you're not ready or willing to be a leader, you better have a good parent. And you better learn that, because your survival's at stake. Because there's no other person that all that information goes through. And frankly, I don't know how other people deal with it. I don't get to talk to other people, a lot about how they deal with all this stuff, except for very rarely. And all of the people that I talk to are post-transplant. So it's a very different world. It's a very different attitude. It's more like, yay, we're finally past it kind of feeling. And it's also, well, I don't know if it's more, I guess there's a lot more pills and stuff and weird stuff you have to deal with post-transplant. And
Right. I was going to say, you're sort of not, it's not like you're cured or anything like that. You have more to deal with, and you still have CF. It seems like a lot.
It's totally different. It's actually just totally different. So like the CF protocol, again, I didn't necessarily have the same kind of CF protocol growing up, but the last 6 months before my transplant, I was very sick. I kind of got a glimpse of what the protocol is, at least when you're super sick. It was the vest, like you said. I had 4 times a day with the vest and the nebs, and 4 different nebs and this kind of thing, nebulizers all the time. And I hope people aren't having to do that as a normal matter of course, like all day, every day. But so it got simpler in that sense. I don't have to do all that, but it's a lot more pills. You're immunosuppressed. You got to deal with that. I have cystic fibrosis related diabetes, and that's just something that comes later if it comes, and it just makes things more complicated. So there's that, but it's a lot of admin, and I guess it is with CF pre-transplant too. If you're doing all those meds and vests and stuff, then you got to get them paid for. And, I feel for anybody that's a CF mom. It's just so much.
It is a lot of work, and you do have to train your kids, teach your kids, all of that stuff. But
yeah.
I think you've learned really well from your mom. Obviously, she sounds incredible.
She is.
And you're handling it really well. I did want to veer a little off of this because I think your musical history is really interesting. In the information that you gave me and the stuff that I read about you, your dad played guitar and trombone in clubs and bars. So I know you love hockey and everything, but I also wanted to talk about your music and the label you started and how that came about, because I think it's really interesting. And
Always.
not to just bombard you right now with so many questions, but are you still in New Mexico?
Yes. Yes. And bombard away. I'm happy.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm always happy to talk about the music part because that ostensibly is my job. I don't make a whole lot of money directly from music, but very few of us do. But yeah, I don't know quite why I became a musician because, like I said, I wanted to be an athlete. But um, yeah, my dad has always played music. I don't know how long he's been playing the guitar, a bazillion years. And so I grew up listening to him, and I didn't grow up too much going to his concert. Like he was playing live a lot when I was a baby. So I went, and I saw him a few times, but mostly I saw him playing at home. Just every day he's playing and singing at home. And then at the same time, this is a weird sort of thing. And so I had this influence. He played a lot of Western swing and folk stuff. I think Bob Dylan and Patsy Cline and that era. And I got this big influence from that. But at the same time, when I was growing up, it was right when hip hop was kind of starting to be a thing in the world. And my aunt, his sister, sent me this tape when I was very young. It was this black tape, and all it said was Street Beat. She dubbed it off a vinyl record, I think. And it was all the super, super classic hip hop. Now, what we think of as like the start of hip hop now, Sugar Hill Gang and these guys. And so I had this tape, and I was like into that. My dad was playing, and then I had everybody in the world got into breakdancing all of a sudden when I was in fourth grade. And it was just this whole thing. And I called myself Breaker, and we had the parachute pants, and it was just this cultural phenomenon. So I had these two very different influences just in my face, like really early, and like at that time when third, fourth grade, when you're just like trying to suck everything in. And yeah, I became this break dancer. And then when I was 14, I started messing with music and actually doing music and rapping. And I thought, I'm going to be a rapper. And at the time I thought, well, this will be what I do in the summer when it's not football season. Right. So, and it turns out I have very little talent as a football player, even without the size, and and a whole lot of talent as a rapper and singer. Although I didn't think I would sing for a long time. But yeah, it became this thing. I went to college, started taking classes, got into recording, made the mistake of thinking that being a recording engineer could be your backup job. Like it's a job you get and you get a salary. It's not how it works. So it's
But you had a plan.
I had a plan. It was the wrong damn plan. Looking back, you always know, right? 2020 hindsight. I think it's the wrong plan really because I got so into the technical side of things and the technical aspect of recording. And then also like the stuff around it. I started the label. I have probably the oldest music-based web presence online because I tried to be a computer science major right when the web was starting to be a thing. So I said, oh, my label can have a website. We didn't even, what's a website? So I built it. I became this tech head when in reality, and I didn't discover this till later, when in reality, what I'm really more built for is to perform and maybe not be mired in the tech details. If that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
This is just an admonishment for anybody that's young listening. First of all, you can't avoid that mistake, so don't do like me and regret it. But also, be true to who you are. And once you do know who you are, don't be afraid to just quit the other stuff and be fully who you are. Because I think that's the biggest mistake I've made is not do that at times. And then the most successes I've had have been when I've sort of been focused entirely on what I'm really built for, if that makes sense. So as a performer, like I've had a lot more success when I just sort of didn't do the label. let it just sort of be a thing over there, and didn't try to do all the tech work, and didn't try to, and so I became a poet for that reason, or I guess not really for that reason. Really, I was just following a girl around. So but it was, a span of 4 or 5 years where all I did was slam poetry, and I just toured the country, and it was so simple and easy because there was no tech involved, and there was no label involved, and my label was over there, kind of struggling along. I didn't really have my attention, but there was so much success and so much joy and so much good stuff that happened. No money, but good stuff that happened because ultimately because I was just like focused on the one thing, and that's been a really sort of weird lesson I've learned about.
Yeah, and I think even no money, you've figured out so much. I mean, even I can relate because I left broadcasting, being in radio and TV, for my foundation, and then I was dismissing everything I had done for 25 years, and I thought, why would I do that? I have always been a journalist. Now I'm a journalist for cystic fibrosis, and thus my podcast. But for a while, I was like, no. I'm not going to do anything. That stuff is gone. And I thought, that's who I am. So it's kind of realizing where your strengths are, right? Because I said, no, I've moved on. And then I found out, oh my gosh, I miss it so much, but I can do it where I want to be, which is with my foundation. No regrets to anything. But I can really appreciate what you're saying. And it really sounds to me like, I don't know that you believe it in your head, but you really had a plan and a path. And when you're speaking it, I think you sound really smart at a very young age, figuring out what you liked, what you were good at, what you were going to do, and how you got to where you are.
Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily always feel like that. And you're always struggling with what you think you should do versus what you want to do. And then you struggle with, well, is that what I want to do, or is that what I want to do, or is that who I want to be? Like, it's this difference between, what makes you feel really good and what makes your ego feel really good. Like, oh, I'm a badass. I would still love to be a pro football player. Like, oh my God, just to be that muscled up. But fact is, I don't, and I would in one sense, because I love practicing things and training and doing physical things and not have to worry about all the being in front of a computer. But one thing is, I really am glad I'm not for the head trauma.
That would be another problem.
Yeah, and it's just there's certain things. Even being a rock star, like I struggle with that to this day. Like, do I still want to be a rock star? Do I want to be this major star? And I'm almost to the point of saying, no, I kind of don't, because of all the stress. Like, that doesn't make you happy. And it's the part where, are you being you? Are you being fully you? And are you just really actually following your bliss? And obviously that's a lifeline question. And it probably changes over and over, right?
Right. But I also think CF has not held you back. And I know we also talked about this prior to the podcast, not liking the word CFer. And
hate it.
For you, I don't know if that's because of the way it sounds or if that's because of that seems to be a defining thing or a label.
The defining thing. I could give you a picture. I mean, this might be a little intense, but if you get a picture of, and I don't take this the wrong way, anybody that's listening. I don't want to disparage anybody or anything. But as a CF patient, as someone with CF my whole life, there's one thing that's my worst fear in the world, and that's to be a skinny little Make-A-Wish kid. Somebody who's just not empowered at all and who is just simply waiting to die. that kind of sort of everybody feeling sorry for me, and I'm going to go and like they're going to give me a meeting with some big strong guy, and I'm going to go, hee hee, oh, I'm so, like ugh, no. And the word CF, for some people, they own it and they love it, and that's fine. For me, it's like that word kind of speaks that reality. It says you are weak, you can't contribute, you're soon to be dead, and I viscerally react to that. Like I just like, so it's not
Yeah.
something I wanted to be defined as, and that's a weird thing too, as a performer, as an athlete, as anybody, anything you try to do, you have to kind of deal with, okay, but I do have CF and I do have to deal with that, and as an athlete, it's, you want to train all the time, and it's really good for you as CF to train all the time, especially running, right? But you may stand a really good chance of not being any good at it. So like even as a hockey player, I've been playing 38 years. I know what I'm doing, but guys who have been playing 2 years have this advantage because they have just more strength and power, and without even trying. And it just drives you crazy. And so you have to deal with the reality. Like there is a reality there, but there's this almost, I don't know if it's healthy or not, there's this healthy level of denial that I want to constantly sort of put in there. Like, don't call me that. Like, I'm not that. And I think other people can relate to that. Like all kinds of people, right? Because you kind of get these labels on you,
Right.
and you're
People
stuck in
don't
it.
want to be defined, right, by cancer or,
Right.
I mean, I certainly don't want to be defined by my age,
Yeah.
or, and I don't think you were disparaging Make-A-Wish or anything like that. I think it was a good visual of how you were able to describe the feeling.
Yeah.
So don't worry about that. But
Good.
yeah, I think we all want to feel strong, mentally strong, physically strong, and have some sort of impact on our lives and the world and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Then you have to kind of balance that with not having survivor guilt, not making yourself feel pressured to do more than normal. I got to be great to justify having survived this.
It's a balance. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is, because as I've shared before, I used to say to my kids, no excuses, just because you have CF, you can't, get out of this. But then I realized that does also put a lot of pressure on them to, nope, we're not sick. Everything is fine. So you really do have to find a balance so they can say, you know what, I'm staying home from school because I'm sick. Or it is a balance. It's definitely.
Yeah, it's totally hard. And I guess it's hard for everyone, right? I mean, to do that. Like, is it time to knuckle up, or is it time to let yourself rest? And nobody in America knows how to do that. I don't think. Right.
We're
And
all
that's
very like,
hard.
go, go, go.
Yeah.
So your label, like, we will put this in show notes, but I want to know, is it pronounced N-Quit? Is that your label? And tell us about that,
Yes.
where people can find you. And then I also want to hear about the Lion of Zimbabwe, how that went.
Tackling N-Quit first is interesting. You should ask that because it's going to go away. So N-Quit stands for Never Never Quit. And it's a book that I had from my uncle that just has a bunch of pictures of athletes and how they were, the obstacles they faced. The biggest one that I remember is Wilma Rudolph, who 100-meter gold and 200-meter gold in the 60s. Couldn't walk without braces till she was 11. So that was like my Bible, right? Never, never quit. Never, never quit is good to a point, and then very, very bad after that point, because it makes you slam your head against concrete walls instead of maybe stop, just take a step to the right and go through a door. So I have kind of grown out of that mentality. And there's a lot of baggage around that label and around that messaging. The label is almost 40 years old. It was a legit label for a long time. We had other artists. I had partners. We did the whole thing. I moved out to Oakland to do that. And then I went to do my master's. But we went after it. It was a record label, and we had artists, and I was the flagship artist, and we did a lot, and we had shows, and we had records out, and we had websites, and we never really did what we wanted to with it because we never could figure out how to grow it because none of us knew anything about business. And that's fine. That's cool. It's still a thing that we did. But now it's dead. It's going to be dead soon. And I mentioned earlier, I have one of the oldest web presences online is now going to expire in April, and I'm not going to renew it. And I feel so relieved and awesome. Now, I'm not quitting music. It's just that old company is going away. So that's nquit.com if you want to go see it. It's there's nothing there. It just sort of says a little bit of history, and it says there's two partners that started, me and my friend Dustin, who grew up with me. We were neighbors, and so we're basically brothers. We started it, and I just basically linked to our things. Now he's off doing his own thing as a filmmaker and an animator, and I still have music, but I'm just a musician. And the music industry and the online industry and all the things that have happened with the internet have made it possible to be serious about being I'm just me, I'm just a musician, without having to have that structure, that label structure. So that it's not just that I'm done with it, it's also that it's possible to do what I do without it now. So that's going to be gone. And now where you can really find me is my name, AaronTrumm.com. Simple.
In our show notes. Okay.
The Lion of Zimbabwe, Thomas Mapfumo. So my mentor is a guy my first recording mentor was a guy named Manny Rettinger at UNM, University of New Mexico. He came in to teach what they called electronic music. It was just like recording technology and synthesizers and craziness. And he sort of brought me under his wing right away. I did have a lot of talent for recording and putting stuff together. And so I became an intern in his studio at the same time as being in a class with him. And probably the second project I worked on with him, and subsequently many, many times over, I worked with him and members of these Zimbabwean musicians from the Thomas Mapfumo band, which is kind of the greatest living legend Zimbabwean musician ever to have lived, I guess. I've only met Thomas Mapfumo like maybe once in passing. He was a superstar. I don't really know. But what was really cool was working with all his musicians. And Manny himself is just this virtuoso guitarist and had gone to Zimbabwe to play and played with that band for a long time. And he was this oddity because he's this white guy and he's like playing and they would throw money at him. He has all these stories that are really cool. So I kind of cut my teeth as a recordist doing this Zimbabwean music with Manny, which is super awesome because it's super hard to record because they have thumb pianos and they're not easy to record. And you got polyrhythms 3/4, which I still can't understand how they do that. And then these bass players that just, and then Thomas. But then the biggest project we did was actually without Thomas because a lot of his band just came and left and they just came to America. And God, the stories, I could go on and on with Manny's stories because they had all these. I remember seeing this huge picture of like a lot of band people, like 30 guys, and like they were pointing to all the ones that were dead, had died of AIDS, because there was that, when the AIDS was a pandemic and it was really bad. A lot of them got by that. So yeah, it was so cool doing all that. I never could understand if Thomas Mapfumo himself was a cool guy. Maybe not. It's like one of those, superstars are often sort of, kind of relate.
Right.
And,
but you love the music.
Oh, the music was great. And the musicians that we did actually get to know were awesome. They were so cool. And they thought of Manny, and Manny had this sort of hole in the wall studio. And the ethos was recording like MacGyver. It was just like, we just figured it out. We didn't have everything that the big guys had. But from their point of view, these guys that were from Africa, Manny was like rich, wealthy. It was just like, this was the big time. And so they just came and they played their butts off. It was so cool.
Well, that is really cool. And thanks for sharing that story. And I want to end the podcast with the future of tell us, first of all, did you get married, have kids, and then where you're going with your law degree aspirations?
Not married, no kids. Actually, kind of glad of that, being a transplant recipient, and the immunosuppression makes kids really dangerous. So I'm actually kind of glad. At one point, I wanted kids, but now, cool. But I have a life partner, who I've been with for 15 years now, and she kind of was a big part of saving my life in the transplant, because she is no nonsense. She does not mince words. She's come up to me and said, "Dude, you're gonna die. Let's get it together." So and I'm in our house right now. She happens to be an attorney. She spent her life in public service. If I didn't know her, I wouldn't know that being an attorney can be something different than you see on TV, because I don't want to do that. But after a long time talking to her, I decided that, one of the things about being a lawyer is that somebody else said to me, it's about being the adult in the room. First of all, it's language and logic based. It's not a tech field. And I've realized that even though I have this huge tech background, I'm not very talented as a STEM person. I'm not very math talented. I'm a developer, but I'm not really that good at it. But as a language person, as a person who potentially can lead conversations, learn how to be super straight like Sandra, that I think I can do on a world-class level. And then there's this opportunity to lead in who knows what way. Maybe I'll run for office. Maybe I'm really interested in and concerned about climate change. So I may end up being an environmental lawyer. I need to make money, so maybe I'll be a corporate lawyer for maybe a solar company that's going to change everything, something like that. Obviously, I have a lot of people around me that are saying, "Hey, you would be a great healthcare advocate," and I'm saying maybe. I tell them maybe, but I'm sure you'll understand. I might have said this to you in an email. It can be a lot to have your whole job to be healthy all the time, and then your work is also that. That might be too much for me. I don't think of myself as invincible anymore, so I may not be able to handle doing too much healthcare work. Don't let Boomer Esiason hear that, because they need to still give me money.
I'm sure Boomer and the foundation would understand your thoughts and respect it completely. And it makes perfect sense. But I just think you're a big neon sign that says try everything, try what you want, and don't limit yourself. I think that you're 49 going on 50 and you're going to go to law school. So I just hope everybody takes away that just keep going and you're following your heart and you know who you are and what you're good at. And yeah, I think you're really cool. I am so glad that I found out about you. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super glad too. I didn't know that I was about to meet some cool people and do some cool stuff. Just typing emails. Plus, and this is so nerdy, but your microphone, I just posted a review of that microphone today.
Of the Rode mic?
Yeah. I love that mic.
I love this microphone. I mean, honestly, it is beautiful. It is it's beautiful.
Sounds
it's
good.
Art.
It's not expensive.
It truly is beautiful. I love all the techie stuff, and
I do too. I'm a big gearhead.
If I had the cash, personally, I would have a huge studio like Dax Shepard, on the top of my garage, and it would be incredible. And
cash,
that little thing,
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your time, and we'll have contact information and show notes. Thanks for sharing your story. And I actually have other thoughts for you on how to get some funding. So, I will pass that on. But thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been fun.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen,
It's not complicated.
who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, The Science of Possibility, and Viatris. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.